I don't think I've ever formally addressed this subject, but I think it's time. So, Mario Kart Wii. It's an interesting topic in my opinion. It's the game that just has refused to die over time, and the discussion surrounding it seem to be quite controversial. And this may surprise people these days, but Mario Kart Wii is my most played video game ever. That means I've played it more than MK7, MK8, really any of the recent games or any game ever. I'm just retired, but I've been around the block because back in the day, I was very involved in the community. So despite, some negative connotations that maybe come with the game and all of that and the recent state of the community, I actually want to take a look at some of the positives because there's a lot to work with here. So content creation, I think, is the big one that pops off of the page for me personally. On the MK8 side of the community, it seems like that's where we're lagging behind MKWii in quite a bit. The game's all over YouTube, and the state of modding really gives the game more control options than ever before. If you combine the two, some crazy things happen. I wouldn't be surprised if there's more projects like Rebalance that take place in the future. It's a really exciting time for modding and all of that. And of course, there's a large enough dedicated player base for Mario Kart Wii. And that's really big, because if you don't have a dedicated player base, then you have nothing. And I would say that the player base is why 14 years later, the game is alive and well. These players, I think, that are still here also are here because they really do love the game, not because it's trendy and new. And they're very vocal about it and personable too. So the big question to take away from this is, how does a community with so many good resources and abilities to occasionally do really great things have the current mindset that really seems to be quite bleak at times? And as some may know, the community appears to have a pretty pessimistic self-view. But look at what the community does have. Look at the lounge features per se. Like, could you imagine something like this existing 14 years ago? Where after every race, a table is just automatically generated and uploaded, and people can see it. Like, I don't know if Mario Kart 8 is going to get to that point ever, but MKWii has it. And it really makes me think that the state of the scene is truly baffling. Before I get more into all of this also, I want to give the disclaimer. I'm currently an outsider, kind of observing what I've seen over time. And while I spend a lot of time around the community, some things might have shifted over time. Like, I'm not active in the scene anymore, I admit that. However, I think the majority of what I say will still be relevant today, because a lot of the things I talk about is why MKC really actually got put into place, Mario Kart Central, if you don't know. And usually I talk about solutions to problems in my YouTube videos, because there's no point in only talking about problems. But the community used to fall into that trap when I was still a part of it, and solutions really rarely seem to be offered. Maybe just nobody felt like it was their responsibility to push for meaningful solutions. However, they didn't really arrive. And it is still true that to come up with solutions, it is important to acknowledge why things might be the way they are. So I'm going to point out some of my observations about where the MKWii scene is that I've made from a distance. The biggest problem overall appears to be that the Mario Kart Wii scene has no general direction whatsoever. On occasion, things will happen, because, that's normal, things happen. But, things are bound to happen. But when they do, there rarely is ever a solid follow-up, and no momentum's ever built. You just get these really incredible things that happen sometimes, and it's very developed in some places, even past what we have in some areas. But there's no long-term plan, and I think that hinders progress quite a bit. And it's easy to just sit here and be like, oh, we'll just come up with a plan, but it's a little harder than that. There's a bunch of tournaments that pop up randomly by motivated people, but nobody's really overseeing how it all fits together. And the point is that there are motivated people, they just can't figure out how to put it all together. And of course, this is easier said than done, because oftentimes you're going to need a trustworthy and unbiased group with, diverse community backgrounds to form some sort of council. And getting a community to agree who should represent said council is going to be really difficult. Now, it's possible to succeed, though. I mean, look at Endgame TV, for instance. That's an organization that has roots with Mario Kart Wii, and it succeeded because they had a vision with goals. And I'm not sure that the Mario Kart Wii scene itself has really ever had that. So how do you get there? I would say that when people are willing to work together, good things can happen. And we're at the point where, you know, maybe the scene, and this is just Mario Kart in general, it's been underdeveloped for a very long time because we just haven't really, you know, tested ourselves and put ourselves, you know, as a collective mind and all of that. When I talked with some of the top Mario Kart Wii players in the past few years, they voiced to me that among some of the other top players and teams in the community that there was kind of a general distaste for one another, and a lot of this appeared to be based on ego and a lack of respect for one another, and as such, I think a power struggle has kind of occurred. And if distaste for one another is holding back the progress at the end of the day, I can't help but ask why. Because you all have the same goal at the end of the day. And I think people need to really just put, you know, petty stuff behind them and realize that. Of course, a group can always go into a project with good intentions and hope that the work that they do will earn them some belief in a larger audience. It's kind of risky to do something in silence, like Mario Kart Central initially, but I felt that when we did our project, we had no choice but to do this. An agreement on positions might be a better option because, you know, sometimes you get into situations where nobody has the authority to claim authority. And I think that's maybe where, you know, things can't really get started because nobody has enough trust for one another. This lack of direction is a slow and painful killer because on the day-to-day, you don't really realize that anything's wrong. It doesn't feel like much is changing. It's kind of like how you feel the next day compared to the day before. But over time, a few things are going to end up happening. First of which is that players are not going to feel like the community has a purpose of doing anything outside of just existing. What are the goals? As this happens, players tend to, you know, treat each other worse because they don't really care, and rarely they will ever actually agree on any changes, and that kind of forces stagnation after a while. I have this weird theory that maybe some players are okay with this and they just like how it is, but I don't think that speaks for the majority. But of course, when nobody can agree on anything, you know, the group of people, perhaps a minority, that wants things to stay as they are, they're going to be the winners here. Those who want to do something about it do so with very little coordination because they have to do so as an independent organizer because nobody agrees on anything. And that makes follow-up events really tough. Something can be a wild success, but it doesn't really matter if you can't, you know, repeat it. And after time, staff members become demotivated too. And this is a huge problem, even though it may not sound like it, because if the best staff members get demotivated, over time the best ones are going to give up because they don't feel supported enough. And this was something that I noticed for the MK8 community back in the first year of the game, back when we were still on MKBoards, because I thought about the long-term consequences, and I'm going to share what I think they are, because I think that maybe this is an underrated thing that people aren't realizing. But I believe that on MKC, we've luckily averted this problem up to this point. So, here's the thing. When you lose good staff members, you have to replace them. And new staff members, you know, sometimes they aren't from day one going to be that guy who was really good, but lost motivation. So, sometimes over time, they become less and less qualified, leading to people who may have had good intentions applying, who just weren't ready to execute the job yet, or never really got the proper training. And if they don't last long on staff, they're going to leave and the cycle is going to continue. This creates a downward spiral, which is kind of scary, and it doesn't become immediately noticeable until it's already too late. Over time, the community is going to lose respect for the staff because they won't see the production that they feel would represent a good staff team, and the staff just won't have the credibility to make the tough but necessary rulings when they don't have when the community doesn't have their back. And because of this, the staff job becomes unreasonably impossible with the community, and I kind of experienced that a little bit in the past on MKB. The community just will not take them seriously enough when this happens. And when the staff begins to feel that they aren't being fairly treated, it's likely because they aren't, and it becomes easy to fall into the trap of defending themselves over making the right decisions because the outsiders who criticize them just don't have the honest perspective that they have. And staff usually then appears to be either a pushover if they don't do anything about it, or if they try to do something about it, they don't have the respect, and they become unnecessarily hostile because if they are a pushover, they're a pushover, but if they aren't, it creates a bad relationship between them and the community. And to avoid both of these things, you typically need to have an outstanding staff member, but if you have all your best people leaving, this becomes more difficult over time. And outstanding staff members who aren't going to fall into the bait of, taking offense to what the community says about them, that's a rare quality. And I think we still struggle with it at times, Self-defense is instinctual. It's hard to do it over doing the right thing or making the right corrections or the right ruling. And if you don't do that, I don't care how bad the community treats you, it's the biggest sign of a toxic staff team. But this is what I meant about it being too late, because so many things push for staff members to want to, fight back for themselves. But after time, they're like, okay, I can't do it all, and they focus on just keeping their name clean rather than improving things. And when this happens, the community will typically become more and more difficult to manage, and we all know that this is not good. So what's important to note? A staff member always has to earn respect. And what makes it difficult to do a good job is sometimes you feel like the community is against you and you feel like the victim. And this has happened with many administrations over MKB, sometimes even MK Central. Like, we've felt it a few times, but you have to remain impartial if you truly want to fix the community. People are not going to listen to staff if they aren't willing to do the job, which includes holding yourself to a higher standard. I really want to emphasize that I have nothing against the admins of MKB. They may be great people who just inherited an impossible situation. This is part of the reason why we felt we had to leave, because it was an impossible situation for a while. But, the other thing is, you also cannot have young teenagers as your community admins. I'm just going to say it. And it's nothing against who they are as people. They may be great. But some staff work literally requires that you're 18 to begin with. And, younger helpers, in my opinion, need to earn their way. But I don't think you get that luxury in a community when all the best staff members give up. It leads to, crazy circumstances. And in my opinion, this is why the lounge appears to be functional in comparison to MKBoards, which has now been falling apart for a few years. There's no other way to really state it. So, if a community can't have a respectful relationship with its administrators, two things are going to happen as a result. The first is that future planning won't ever take off, leading to the whole lack of direction thing that we mentioned. And if a staff team is only ever focused on justifying inaction or tossing blame elsewhere, there is no time for them to actually work on things that are productive. Number two is toxicity is going to fester because it's never going to properly be punished. The staff team does not have the respect from the community to properly do the necessary rulings, and people are going to get away with it, and they know that they're going to be able to get away with it. Now, the first point here is pretty bad, but the second one creates a lot of additional consequences, and a community will then become beholden to toxic individuals if this actually is allowed to continue. And this results in the following. People always get away with toxic behavior as long as they have enough backers. Staff teams may unintentionally be corrupt with appeals and stuff due to outside pressure, because outside pressure, they're not going to want to deal with it because they're always going to have to deal with something. They're going to be softer in general because people are going to know that they can manipulate them and take advantage of them. Another thing, when this happens, nothing is ever done with new players in mind because, toxic individuals realize that they can get their way every time. So they kind of generate, the decisions of leadership. Things aren't inviting as a result. Flaming and racism get tolerated and even justified or normalized sometimes, and that's how we've led to really bad things in the past. And this all is somehow justified because the community rationalizes that they need to preserve what they have left versus building for the future. They say, if we ban this person, then who do we have left? And I'm here to say that this is wrong, and you really do need to invest in the future, because if you're not going away, maybe you can have a future. You just have to have a different perspective. Now, let me tell you, the people who stick around in bad communities don't do so because they love the community. They're simply addicted to the game. That's why they're still here. It's 2022, dude. Mario Kart Wii came out 15 years ago. They're addicted to the game. They're not going to leave. They aren't going to leave because you make things better for outsiders, if you really think about it. But outsiders won't join or get into it if the toxicity is overwhelming. Now, I saw a recent example of people telling people that, Like there are some people that were not okay with insensitive comments in one of the community chats. Those people, even some staff members, I think, said that those people should stick to Mario Kart 8 because, you know, that's what it's like over there. If you can't handle it, to not play Mario Kart Wii. And in this instance, this is staff people literally inviting people to not join your community. So, of course, your community is not going to get as many members as it could if things like this are allowed to persist. Over time, I think things like elitism, you know, kind of happens. That's another general form of toxicity, and that's been rampant since the beginning of the Mario Kart Wii community. And I want to say this, like, it's fine to have some ego. Like, I hate hearing that it's a kid's game as, like, an argument. Because at the end of the day, a bunch of us take this game seriously and try to be the best at it. And winning's a legitimate achievement. Like, it's not easy to do. But it's, of course, important to realize that no achievement gives you the right to be a jerk. And even though most, you know, strong players aren't jerks, I think, it happens enough to trickle down. Let's face it, Mogi formats, and that's very popular in Mario Kart Wii, as we all know, they create situations where people end you at times when it may not be better for themselves to do so. That's the way of the FFA, in a sense. People who win in situations where 2 people get hit are the other 10 people, not the people in the exchange. So players don't like scoring low, of course, and there's a sense of pride that comes with, you know, having a high-ranked status. So if you have a bad event, which can often happen because of bad luck in this game, it appears players are more likely to put a player that they're, you know, ranked higher than on blast for a decision because they screwed them over one race. And this may, like, they may use it as, like, justification. It's like, well, I would have scored if this guy wasn't an idiot. And I guess it's, like, due to general frustration, but, you know, I think a lot of it has to do with just ego and all of that. And many of these people, I think, do this just to people ranked below them because they feel like they can get away with it. And then, you know, the new and weaker players, or the weakest, end up being on the receiving end ultimately because the players that get belittled by other players, you know, continue the cycle and belittle people lower than them. And the players at the end, you know, they're the ones that are least likely to put up with it and stay in the scene. So, again, not necessarily the best formula for retaining people. Is there really any form of accountability for toxic behavior? Because, don't get me wrong, I think that, like, things have gotta be chill, right? Like, people can say stuff that's not, like, not all of us are always going to be nice 100% of the time. It's just, there's a tipping point. In my opinion, like, one way to, you know, create a way for there to be accountability outside the staff team, because, like, right now, that, you know, maybe a staff team isn't respected, like, there has to be a natural change of mindset. Because being good at the game needs to become less cool than being self-conscious about your scores. What I mean by that is, like, if you're, like, complaining or making up excuses in chat, that should be seen as more cringe as scoring low. Because if that can happen, this whole belittling thing may slow down. Being good at the game also shouldn't protect you from getting your behavior called out if you're being a jerk. You know, we went through some growing pains in the MK8 community as well. You know, some top players and stuff feeling immune and stuff. And it was tough to solve, but I think ultimately everyone involved came out better for it. And I don't think that top players today are really necessarily wanting to belittle people. We've kind of just grown out of it, I think. And it was tough, but ultimately worth it. I remember in my first year on MarioKartWii.com, the old boomer site that a bunch of you probably don't remember, like, you know, I think a few of the other top players that play MKWii still today experienced it at one point. And, you know, sometimes the hard and unfair route in life that you have to take sometimes is finally taking your place at the top of the ladder, but being the one that doesn't abuse the perks that come from it. And a community can be reflective of both of its leadership and top players, so it's important that the trends that we establish are good ones. So the top players, if you guys want your scene to truly, you know, become larger and, you know, have more people involved in all the stuff and establish more prestige in your events, you know, you guys gotta set an example, of course. Now, I have a friend who used to be a well-known and pretty notorious Mario Kart Wii player, and he was not very much liked by the community because he had what was considered an annoying or weird playstyle, and frequently he was on the end of some harassment as a result of it all, and it led to his quitting of the game entirely at that point. I think that this kind of stuff, like, this stuff can't really be happening, but it usually happens because of ego. And again, talked a lot about toxicity here, but that is also not the only issue. Outsiders also are not going to join the community if the community offers them nothing meaningful. So Mario Kart Central bet on growth and new players when we started rather than what we had, and it ended up paying dividends. The average player in the Mario Kart 8 community now is not a founding member of our site and doesn't remember the game used to actually run on Mario Kart boards. And yet they are here now and staying, and this is why we are succeeding, I think. We are more than what we used to be, and the original community that was there when MKC was founded is grateful for that, I think. And growing is how you have a positive future and avert dying out ever. Fixing toxicity is not the key to growth, though. It is the bare minimum requirement. And like mentioned, there needs to be meaningful ways to participate. I think every time something is introduced, how it relates to new players must be kept in mind. So let's go over a few examples. The first thing that we tried to do was a tournament called Agility. Obviously, there's a lot of blowouts in team tournaments, so we wanted to make the initial rounds of tournaments shorter. This would make blowout experiences less painful and end sooner, and also make it so teams could maybe have a reasonable chance, more often than not. Eventually, we ran a tournament called Frontier, that kind of was the successor to Agility, and we made it so that the top-seeded teams did not play the initial parts of the tournament whatsoever, so teams had to earn their way to get harder matches, so matches in general were just closer than normal. And of course, there's Mario Kart Universal, or World Clan League, and that is just designed for new players. So, there's a lot of ways that you can make things more attractive for new players in the form of tournaments alone. I think right now we're working on some ways to make free-for-all tournaments more accessible, and that's still a work in progress, but it's definitely worth noting. So, the one big tournament project that I remember seeing from the Mario Kart Wii scene was MKPS, and when I saw this project initially, I was really excited to see how it would turn out, because it felt like a sense of direction was attempted for competitive teams, and I thought some sort of team circuit could really renew interest in team competition again. And of course, I only looked at it from the surface level. I heard complaints about it later on. Now, it appeared to me that some matches felt like a waste of time, or that beyond a circuit idea, it kind of lacked innovation. And many people complained that the organizers left people in the dark about things and kept projects hidden. I remember talking to an MKB admin actually about plans with this staff at one point, and there was effectively no coordination between the groups whatsoever. At one point, I think I saw a double elimination tournament without a bracket reset. I don't know if it was MKPS, but it was a tournament that ran around the same time period, and that's just not fair competition. You gotta do better than that. So I know it ultimately wasn't popular with the community, but I did not observe it close enough to give a full opinion on formats on it. It was likely too long at the end of the day, but from the very outside perspective, it looked to me like the biggest problem was sustainability and the promises that came with it, even if that's probably not the popular complaint about it. Opening seasons of tournaments can be bad due to inexperience sometimes. It doesn't mean the tournament's necessarily bad, but the answer isn't always to can the idea. Sometimes the best tournaments end up happening because we learn from our mistakes. But if you can't consistently deliver on the best aspects of a tournament or series, you're effectively, doing the TO equivalent of living paycheck to paycheck and giving yourself no opportunity to improve upon your event or come up with a future plan. Now, I'm sure at the time it seemed cool, but what did the community actually gain out of having a big prize pool for MKPS in the end? And a better question, where's the money coming from? Now, I heard that it came out of a generous community member's wallet, and that's an honorable thing to do for a community you love, no doubt. Don't get me wrong, but what comes after, because is the same person going to be willing to do it again? And even if the event is a massive success, if the prize pool can't be matched in the future, nothing would compare to it in the future, and you want things to kind of go up over time, but if you can't do that every year, it's not going to go up over time, you're going to peak early. It's not any one person's responsibility to dump their hard-earned money on this community either. Ideally, you would like to create an event that can be repeatable because the community can generate that kind of prize to begin with. That's what you really got to do. Doing it one time is almost like a shortcut or pretending. And again, it's not one person's responsibility. It should ideally, have more people involved in the process, but without future planning or good planning in advance, this can be kind of tough. Additionally, where does the money go in the end? Because It seems like it just goes to top players, and realistically speaking, this cash prize excludes new players. And I get it, you have to work your way up, right? But unless this becomes an amazing spectator event, it is hard to see this massive prize event as a draw. And not everything has to be a draw, but if it cannot pay for itself and the community doesn't have many other ways to generate revenue, it's hard to see something like this as anything but a donation to a bunch of top players in hindsight. Like, good for them, it's cool, but I don't think this pushes things forward. I think there's likely other ways to make better use of donated money by potentially, investing in the future. But of course, you go back to the problem with the lack of the respect of the staff team, so who's actually going to handle this money? And again, there's not always a bunch of trust. As far as the community setup goes, I think that's about all I have to mention. That's, in my opinion, the objective reason why the community has struggled using MKBoards as a platform, and lots of the reasons why the MK8 community eventually got out. And it was never really meant to be like spiteful or anything, but more so, like, we just had to carve our own path and direction. After a while, you see the problems and stuff, and it comes to a point where things don't really feel fixable, and sometimes you have to start anew. Another thing that was always hard when coexisting with Mario Kart Wii in the past, was the hostility brought out toward our game. I vividly remember lots of Mario Kart Wii players always trashing on Mario Kart 8, like, excessively. And it's not like I was like, it's not like I wasn't part of these toxic discussions, don't get me wrong. Because, I always felt like I was coming from the perspective of self-defense, but maybe the other side was too. But, of course, it's possible that some Mario Kart Wii players just saw the game as a bit of an attack on their game from the start, since the original launch of MK8 came just 10 days after Wi-Fi shut down for MKWii. And thing is, I think that this is kind of a problem still, because when we were still on MKB, I felt many players weren't proud to be part of the game's community, and I don't really get that vibe anymore. On its own platform on Mario Kart Central, Deluxe has flourished, and the negativity surrounding the game in that first year doesn't really exist anymore. And I kind of feel like distancing ourselves from some of the negativity actually changed the perception of the game a little bit. Personally, I feel like a lot of the bigger MKWii content creators create a lot of negative publicity for our game at first, and the bigger creators have often used it as a gag or have mentioned how awful it is in their descriptions and like their Twitch and all that kind of stuff. And it's fine to have that opinion, of course, but I just don't get why it's such a sore subject for Mario Kart Wii players in general. Like, if we were to ever work together at some point in the future, like, this stuff has got to be, like, put aside. And obviously you can have opinions and all that kind of stuff, but I remember that was really hard back in the day because I kind of felt like our game wasn't getting the treatment that it deserved. And again, that's why we did what we had to do. Even to this date, I still see a lot of the unnecessary hostility towards the game, and a lot of it isn't even for super valid reasons. A lot of it is, well, the game's just different. So, again, to wrap this video up, as an outsider that is rooting for the MKWii scene still, what would I want to see? As somebody, who's in like a sister community, right? Well, the first thing is, you would like to see the hostility defeated between the games and all that kind of stuff, more support for each other. The World Cup last year was pretty cool. I know we still kind of stayed a little bit separate, but that was a good example of, the communities like building each other up in a sense. A lot of people heard about the other games and all that kind of stuff because the other games drew them in first. And again, that was an example of being better together. The other thing, all the things that I've mentioned, the problems like the toxicity, the lack of opportunities for new people, the leadership issues, and the direction, all that, like, solutions to those is necessary if things want to be pushed forward. And it starts with a direction. And that, I think, has to get solved as well. Next thing I want to continue seeing is the, mods growing and all that stuff. But I'd like to see, like, more competitive things more competitive oriented stuff in those mods. Now, I think one thing that MKWii struggles with personally is the shock meta in teams. I would even argue, I know a lot of you guys are going to disagree with me, but I would even argue that it's borderline harmful and takes away from some of the perks of the game. I think the game could be really cool if some tweaks were ever made and universally agreed upon. I don't know if that's something that's going to happen, but I know for a fact that not all the players really like how the shocks operate in teams. And there's a lot of good aspects still, but you want to highlight those even more so, right? Really, something kind of like Project M, I think, is really, one what you want to do. I know Rebalance did a little bit of modding to, you know, create a new metagame and stuff, but I don't know exactly if that was as focused on distribution as much as it was like stat tweaking. But it was really cool to watch and see that idea grow. Ideally, you want to see teams as the main competitive format, just because in an MK game, that's kind of how you decrease RNG in your events more, but I think I would prefer Mogies personally if I were to be an MKWii player right now, just because I don't really like how the shock meta operates in the main teams format. And I guess the last thing I saw was, you know, I've heard that CTGP is eventually going to have like unlimited tracks, and that Mr. Bean's still only taking like 216 to, like, you know, do quality control, and I think that's good. But I think there still are a few flaws of the system, because I think right now it seems more like a pick the winner kind of thing than it is like something like ranked choice voting, which I think is objectively better in most areas. Look, if 80% of the community dislikes a track, but 20% really like it because they like to take advantage of its selection on CT Worldwide and stuff, I don't think a track like that should be in the pack personally. And there are just enough courses that I hear are infamous that are still in, because a few people like it, that I kind of think that how the voting system's going right now is still kind of weird. Again, we'll see what happens in the future, but it was just a personal thought that I wanted to throw in, just because, why not? It's an MKWii video. But again, I mean, this is about it, but I think, you know, actually establishing a sense of direction and collaborating has to be the goal for Mario Kart Wii right now, because, like I mentioned, there's a lot of positive things about the scene, but you're not really going to ever take off until that collaboration happens, and I think that there's a lot of potential for the game still. I know I personally kind of am probably not going to play it ever again. Maybe, who knows, but, you know, I played so much of it that I'm kind of over it now. But it would be cool to see the game have a resurgence again, like a true one, and I think it would help all Mario Kart games if it did. It could help with, you know, in-person Mario Kart events. That's something that's happening with MK8 recently, and, you know, if more people, like, there's still not enough people that are showing up. Like, things are definitely trending upward, but having more people from different games attending would potentially boost that to infinity. And, you know, just bring people into the buildings, right? We need all the help that we can get. So, you never know, there's some untapped potential on that. But I think I've talked enough now, really got out everything that I was kind of thinking about where it's at right now. Appreciate you all for watching. I hope that some of you guys learned something from this video, you know, saw the MKC perspective and all of that, and maybe this can help invoke some sort of change. But really, it's up to the players, and there's a lot of really good, dedicated players. Just, you all really have to start working together. There can't be like contempt or anything for each other. Realize that you all are kind of on the same team, right? So anyway, that's it for now. If you guys are interested in topics like this, I'm thinking about actually doing a more detailed look at why MK Central I think was necessary in the future, but hey, we'll see when we get there. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.